this is Amelia Vogler, specialist in energy medicine and your host in the Energy Magazine exclusive interview series. Today, our guest is Julie Bjelland, and she is a sensitivity expert, a psychotherapist, and an author. Her online courses developed for highly sensitive people and her sensitive empowerment community have helped thousands of people with highly sensitive traits around the world reduce their challenges, access their gifts, and discover their significant value in the world. Julie's known for her ability to teach people tools that work quickly, and I think we're going to have an opportunity to practice some of those with her. And she's been on a mission to empower sensitive people to live their very best lives. So Julie, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation about this.
Yeah, I've been so excited to have this conversation with you since I read your article, since we had a chance to, sort of email back and forth. I think I might be one of these highly sensitive people. But what I remember the most, and I thought I would just offer this, check it out and see if any of our other community members might resonate with this. When I was a little girl, my mom would take me to the grocery store, stick me in the buggy, and my little legs would be, flying out there. And she'd kind of park me over next to the oranges or the bananas or the sweet potatoes, and she'd go around and get the vegetables in that area, the section in the store. And so what I would experience was the guy walking past with a backache and my back would hurt. And then the lady that walked by and she was so sad, I would start crying. And then the guy who I had this horrible sense like he's really, really unwell. I can just feel it in his bones. And I'd hear somebody laughing over here and I would start laughing. And, the grocery store was just hell for me. I would just suck in everything. And so I started being really curious about my experience after reading your article and wondering, okay, well, I've always thought about myself as an empath. So is being highly empathetic the same as being a highly sensitive person, or, is there a relationship between these two things?
Such an awesome question. And it sounds like my experience as a child too. I think about that too in like school when I was in grade school or something. I was so distracted by, is the teacher okay? Are these kids over here okay? And to answer your question about the trait a little bit, and to understand the difference between being a highly sensitive person and an empath. So I'll give a little bit of background about the trait first to kind of get some understanding of it. It's actually a scientifically proven trait. It's not a disorder. It's a trait that's been found in about 20% of the population, equal in gender. About 70% are introverts and 30% extroverts. So it's not the same thing as introversion like some people think. And there's actually a spectrum of sensitivity. And at the highest level of that spectrum are empaths. And this is something, it's interesting because when I first started out, I really wanted the psychology community to take this trait seriously. So I stayed in the lane of science and didn't talk or think a lot about the empath part of it. But as I got more involved in the community, I realized that a lot of people were identifying themselves as empaths. And the more I learned about it, I kind of realized I was one as well. And so what I've kind of learned is, like, I have a sensitivity scale, and that's free for people to take. And those of us that score at the highest level are likely both HSPs and empaths. And I believe that now we don't have, because we have a lot of science and research that shows this trait of high sensitivity exists. And it's kind of known as the highly sensitive person, or you'll hear me refer to it as HSP for short. I think it is my opinion, because we don't have as much research about empaths, but it's my opinion that empaths also have this trait, but not necessarily all HSPs are not necessarily all empaths because of that sensitivity scale. So hopefully that kind of clears it up a little.
Oh yeah, that makes really good sense to me, especially as I've ended up developing different ways of working with being an empathetic person. It hasn't in any way closed the curtain on my highly sensitive nature. It's just helped me buffer some in terms of what am I taking in versus what am I responsible for here? So
Yes,
somewhat of a
absolutely. I think empaths, we really read and soak in each other's energy. Like you were saying, as yourself as a little child, you were just soaking up the energy of people walking by you. And with if we're really high up on that scale of sensitivity as an empath and HSP, and we don't have training, it can be incredibly overwhelming to soak in everything that everybody feels all the time. And I used to feel that way too. I was so overwhelmed, even just going into a mall or something when I was younger. I didn't know how to understand it. And I've raised sensitive children now, so I kind of had a sense of what they needed and how they would get overwhelmed and what was the things that they needed to help protect that and separate that energy as needed. Because if you can learn how to navigate that reading of energy, you can use it for so many gifts. You just have to make sure that you're lifting off that layer of overwhelm, which has been a big part of my mission to teach HSPs how to do that.
well, Julie, just kind of circling back to your work with your own children, would you mind offering the group a few of those or one of those ideas of how to work with a highly sensitive child?
Yes. Oh, it is so essential that parents understand the trait if they have a highly sensitive child. And we have research. This is where this really excites me, because there's research that shows that children with the trait of high sensitivity that are raised in supportive environments actually excel in life even more so than children without the trait. But many of us, our parents didn't know about the trait, so we didn't get the support that we needed. So we tend to, if we didn't have the right support, are more likely to experience things like anxiety and depression, panic attacks, things like that. So just believing that the trait is real and understanding it as a parent is going to help a lot, so that little things like, I can remember an HSP telling me one time that their parents made them wear this like really itchy wool sweater, and it was so distracting for them all the time. And if you have parents that don't believe that you're experiencing that, then that's going to make you feel like something's wrong with you. And I think a lot of HSPs, including myself, grew up thinking, we heard words like, why are you so sensitive? What's wrong with you? Nobody else has this problem. Why do you have this problem? And that, combined with the overwhelming emotions that we're having and the sensitivity that we're experiencing, impacts us in lots of ways. So like even one of my sons, he had a real problem with seams in the socks. It just would drive him crazy that these seams were in the socks, and to be able to get seamless socks, or to really think about what texture is bothering them, bright lights, loud sounds, overwhelm, like kids going to birthday parties with lots of other kids, or having events, packed, being too busy. We need a lot of time to rest our sensory system, because scientifically this trait is called sensory processing sensitivity. So we have sensitivity in what we're processing, and we're taking in a lot of information and data that actually needs to be processed. So downtime, I just wrote this article, it's talking about how alone time is a medical necessity for HSPs, and I completely stand by that, because I've seen, and this is in children, teens, adults, teaching them, like your children and your teens, and even yourself as an adult, if you're just learning about this trait, how to take that downtime and not have a constantly overstimulated life is like life-changing.
Amazing. Well, when you said, and I just wanted to probe a little bit deeper in this, you said that children who have parents that acknowledge this trait can excel in life. And I think this kind of takes us into the blessing and the curse area of being a highly sensitive person. But I was wondering if you might share a little more about what it means to excel, what it means, what it might look like to sort of be cursed with the HSP trait.
Yeah, I kind of think of HSPs as having a supercomputer brain, that we have the capacity to take in an incredible amount of information and details that most people miss. So we can actually read micro expressions, body language, energy that, more than 80% of the population is actually missing. So that's something, I mean, I think about myself as a psychotherapist, for example, if I'm working with a client, I can read what they're experiencing, and it just kind of gets downloaded into my brain because I know how to access that. And that's a part of it, is like your gifts can be buried underneath the overwhelm. Because if you're taking in, I like to think of it like, if you think about the nervous system as being a container, an HSP might be dumping in 100 cups of data into that container every day. And a non-HSP, somebody without the trait, might just be putting in a few cups of data. So that data needs to be processed, and you have to be alone and have quiet time to be able to process that data. And if we process it in the right ways, then the gifts really get to emerge. But if we don't, and I know many of us, I didn't used to process it correctly, and I really struggled with anxiety and depression in my life. And that's a really hard way to live, to struggle in these areas. And it could have been avoided had my parents known about the trait, had they been able to support my sensitivities, to know what I needed, to help me emotionally regulate. I had, like, one of my sons, when he was little, his emotional regulation was difficult. Like, even if he was playing a video game and he would get so into the game and he would almost like lose himself, I had to kind of teach him about what that looked like when it was rising too high and he needed to kind of like step back and get some balance. And so being able to kind of navigate that within yourself is really helpful. So you get to access these gifts. I mean, there's so much empathy and compassion and caring in this population of people. And this trait evolved as a survival strategy of the population. We really were meant to be the guides to others. And that's an important thing to understand, that we have these gifts that need to be shared, and the world needs these gifts.
You know, you read my mind, which is probably not uncommon. I mean, you it up somewhere in between us. But I was just thinking, I wonder what um, vocations or what role the highly sensitive people play in our, larger community. So you were talking about the guides. You also mentioned sort of this idea of anticipatory anxiety, the anxiety that comes up, and I want to get to that in a minute. But there was something else that you said. So you mentioned anxiety, and so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that anticipatory anxiety. In the article, you gave us some really good examples of what that might look like. And I tend to work with a lot of people who have PTSD. So I was noticing that a lot of the anticipatory coping mechanisms were really resembled the same ones of some of the people that I work with who have a traumatic history. And I was wondering, in what ways you might support someone in differentiating or kind of extrapolating, like, where am I sitting on that spectrum? What's this anxiety related to?
Yeah, and it can be related to different things. And for example, if that nervous system container is too full and it hasn't been processed, that impacts everything. It even impacts our health, our ability to process toxins in our environment. And I found it incredibly amazing in my research of HSPs that our sensitivity challenges would go up without the right kinds of self-care that helps us stay balanced. But if you're doing the right kinds of balance in your life, you're practicing meditation and mindfulness and slowing down and time in nature and things like that. Meditation and mindfulness are hugely important for people with this trait. If you're doing those right things to center yourself, then you're actually, everything, mind, body, spirit, is impacted by that. So if I'm processing what I'm experiencing, I'm going to reduce my sensitivities. Lights won't actually be as bright for me, or sounds won't bother me as much. But if I'm not, I'll even experience textures, like suddenly a blanket that was fine for me one day is now actually almost hurting my skin. So I think that this is something that's really important to understand, that there's something that we can do about the challenges. But it involves doing things differently than most people do them. And that's the key of being able to, honor your needs and pay attention to what they are. And a lot of HSPs who are very externally focused by default. How are they doing? Are they okay? Do they need something? We're just very externally focused. So we want to bring back more internal focus. How do I experience things? What are my needs? How would I, look at my day and find balance today? Have I overscheduled myself? Can I say no and set healthy boundaries without guilt? Because guilt is draining. As HSPs tend to be people pleasers and givers in lots of ways. So we need more time to get to know what we need. And when I first started my work, I had to do that too. I wouldn't even know how I felt about something because I would always filter it through what I thought everybody wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I spent a lot of my life, I didn't own my life, actually. So doing this type of internal work where you get to know yourself on these deeper levels, we even have more activation in the insula part of our brain that allows us to have an incredible amount of consciousness and awareness. So HSPs are known for, if they get the right tools, they can transform really fast. Because I actually used to work with both HSPs and non-HSPs, and I was always shocked at how quickly an HSP could advance into growth and empowerment. So that's exciting to me, because if you can access those little pieces of gifts that you have, you can really thrive to a very high potential. HSPs make really great leaders and healers and teachers, educators, so many important roles that we have in the world.
That's wonderful. What about, and you mentioned mindfulness and doing some different sort of thoughts just around your own personal orientation with your life, but you also talked about brain training and having different techniques for activating some of the calming centers of the brain. Can you share a little more about that?
Yes, it's one of my favorite pieces of work because I used to struggle so much. And when I learned more about the brain, and specifically the brain of people who have this trait, we have brain differences. And the more I understood that and researched that, it was really exciting to me, because you can actually intentionally activate calming centers in the brain that deactivate stress centers because they can't be activated at the same time. So there's a lot of things you can do, like the breath technique I talk about in the article is incredibly helpful. Like you can actually lower your heart rate. I mean, that's amazing to me, by doing a particular breath technique. So we have, HSPs can have more activation in the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain, which also could mean that can make us more, we might have anxiety more than others and things like that. So what I was really excited about is that you can even prevent the release of adrenaline. So to kind of explain that a little bit more, the brain cannot tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. So even self-criticism, which actually can be quite high in HSPs because we're very hard on ourselves with high expectations, can activate the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain. You can actually send a signal to your brain that you're in danger, and your brain is setting your body up as if a lion is about to attack you. So it changes the way you breathe. It changes the way that your body uses oxygen. So, and you will take short, shallow breaths when you're in those kind of fight, flight modes. And so being able to increase the long exhale. So the breath technique is like a full inhale for the count of 4. You hold it for 2, and you exhale for 7. And you do that for about 5 to 7 breath cycles. And notice that the exhale is long and slow. When you're breathing like that, you send a signal to your brain that you're okay, you're not in danger, and you don't need it to activate those alarm bells in the system, because you don't breathe that way if a lion is about to attack you. Your oxygen goes into your muscles and gets you ready to run or fight. So being able to have, and with the brain training, I love it because you can actually get so good at this that you can prevent the fight flight from being activated in your brain before it's activated. Once the adrenaline's already been released into your system, it takes about 30 minutes for it to be reabsorbed. So it takes time to calm down. So it's really helpful to get to know, and use these techniques early.
What about when you were talking about the inner critic being so strong? Why do you think that is?
I have a theory. It's because a couple of different things. I think most HSPs have received messages that something's wrong with them. because they do experience the world differently. So a lot of us have a struggle with self-esteem in the first place. That used to be my experience too. And I think that we tend to see things in a different way, and we have to understand that our experience is going to be different than other people, and that how we experience things is okay. And because if we're being so self-critical, like we have such high expectations of ourselves and actually others too. And so this can be a problem in relationships sometimes for HSPs with high expectations. We try so hard to get it right the first time. This is actually part of the trait. We need a group of people in the world that are like that want to get things done right the first time. Can you imagine a society without people like that? But we tend to go a little overboard and get into perfectionism. That's a big part of the challenges of this trait too, because if we're so hard on ourselves and expect perfection, we're going to fail because perfection doesn't exist. And I know I used to live in that place. And so if I would make a mistake or something would go wrong, I would get so activated that literally my brain would think I'm in danger. My heart would start racing. I would tense up. And what's interesting is that you lose access to your cognitive brain when that emotional brain has taken over. And that's scary because your cognitive brain is where your memory is and your focus and your judgment and your ability to even know that there's tools to use. So, and I think every HSP has experienced it when the emotional brain has taken over. You're very irrational and fearful and feel emotionally out of control, really dysregulated, things like that. So that's kind of my theory about it. It has to be something you really consciously work on. I had to work on that a lot myself over the years, and it is so much easier to live life not expecting yourself to be perfect.
Another thought that comes to mind around that is the role of self-compassion and the cultivation of self-compassion, kind of meeting the inner critic or meeting the overwhelm. And you mentioned that you have a self-compassion technique that you might be willing to share with us.
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned it. But to me, this is one of the most life-changing things you could possibly do in your life, is to develop more self-compassion. I started out without self-compassion. And when you don't have self-compassion and something goes wrong, or somebody's criticized you, or you have a lot of extra stressors going on, you can really crumble and fall apart in life. Because if you think about how is your self-talk, for a lot of HSPs, it's kind of rough. Would you say those things to somebody you love, what you say to yourself? So it's something that is actually a brain training skill. You can learn self-compassion. And when I first started learning about self-compassion, I always joke it was kind of like trying to believe in Santa Claus. Like I didn't really believe the self-compassion, but I was trying. But if you keep practicing it, you do get better at it. Your brain learns it. So there's a 3-step process that I really like to use with HSPs. The first step is hand on your heart, and you say you want to acknowledge what you are feeling, because we need to acknowledge in order to do something about it. And what's really interesting is just coming up with the words activates the cognitive brain, and the cognitive brain supports the emotional brain. So just by acknowledging it, you're reducing the intensity by about 50% right there. Very important. So being able to say, wow, I'm actually kind of scared or angry or whatever it is that you're feeling, being able to name that emotion is important. Then the second step is to go into normalizing and validating. This is really magical for HSPs because we've felt so invalidated for so many years. Most of us have felt that way, invalidated for what we feel. So being able to say, it makes sense to me that I'm feeling, scared right now. It makes sense to me that I feel that way. And the normalizing, it sounds like other people feel that too. So you're already starting to soothe yourself by saying it's okay. And it makes sense that we feel this way. These emotions are okay. We're taking 1,000-pound weight off of ourselves when we can normalize and validate our experience. And then that third step is being able to check in. What do I need right now? It's like, okay, if I'm feeling scared right now, what do I need? Do I need a hug? Do I need to go outside? Do I need to journal? Do I need to meditate? So you're really asking yourself what you need to support yourself through that feeling. and keep practicing this. I always tell HSPs, don't just do self-compassion once in a while, because it's not going to be as strong as if you do it every day. It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it is and the easier it is to access. So come down the line, something happens and you really need it, it's going to change your life to have it. Like, I cannot believe, even just going through what we're going through in the world right now as a sensitive person, to feel everything so deeply and to be able to be kind and loving with myself through this helps me be more resilient. And I 100% know if I had not developed this brain training skill of self-compassion, I wouldn't be doing everything I'm doing right now. I'd be struggling a lot more. So it's like having a supportive friend with you all the time. And that's what we need.
Julie, what do you think some of those signs of struggle might be for folks listening?
I think, having a really high stress levels, and that will show up in your physical body as well. Being emotionally reactionary, that's a big one, which causes a lot of conflict in relationships. We get triggered really easy. We're reactionary. We're not able to handle an intense emotion. It becomes too much. That's where the anxiety or depression might come in. And being able to soothe yourself through what you experience is a huge thing. You can, without it, you might have irritability, lack impatience, be snapping at your kids or your partner. You might lose focus and have a hard time being productive. And you also lose access to your creative centers in your brain. So to be able to go into these places of self-soothing and self-compassion, you'll access all that back. You'll get your cognitive brain back, so you can focus and be productive and be creative and thrive in the world, not just survive. That's a big part of my my mission, is really to help HSPs move out of just surviving and really into thriving, because I believe people with this trait have so much to offer the world, and it's really valuable and needed.
Julie, what would you say to the listener who is an HSP and for the first time, listening to you speak, saying, "Oh my gosh, that really sounds like me." Where would you have them start, either with your resources or with techniques?
Yes, great question. The first thing I would do is say, take my free sensitivity quiz, because that's going to really open up your eyes a lot in terms of how you experience the world. And once you do that, you'll see there's videos that I share with you more about the trait. I have a ton of resources on my website. I have an HSP podcast. I have an HSP blog. I would recommend signing up for my sensitive empowerment newsletter. And I also have some amazing courses that have been really helping HSPs right now, like my brain training course and some other courses you can see there too, as well as my sensitive empowerment community. I'm very involved with people with this trait, and my mission is really lifting them higher in the world, because that's how I change the world, is by lifting up and empowering other HSPs, because I know that that's what happens as they go out and make the world a better place. It's just who you are. When you're thriving, that's what you do. So I would say start with that. Sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get that when you take the sensitivity quiz.
Julie, thank you so much. Thank you for doing your work and living this path that brought you to this work, because I have a feeling that in the way that you have opened my eyes and also my heart, and also that little new hint of self-compassion, I was really hearing a lot of my own personal experiences, and you are such a gift. You are such a gift, and this work is amazing. It's needed, and I have to wonder that as our community continues to increase its vibration, the collective, as we continue to evolve ourselves into more sensitive and dynamic beings, what also is happening is that we're becoming more highly sensitive, as a culture, as a group, as a collective. So,
Yes, we're raising the vibration. I think that is such an important thing, and I love seeing HSPs and empaths understand their value, and to be able to help support them into sharing their gifts in the